Hello there, fellow model makers, and welcome to the fourth part of our Hobby Boss 1/32 scale Spitfire Mark 5B build. This is where we left off last time. The engine and the cockpit were completed, and the fuselage was glued together. It's time now to do some cleaning up on the fuselage. What I'm looking to do is get rid of the seam lines between parts that I have glued together, like here, between the two fuselage halves. I start by sticking some masking tape a few centimeters away from the seam line. I'm doing this so that the detailing, like the rivets and panel lines, are not damaged in the process. With that done, I now use this special tool I got for sanding around curved surfaces and start sanding the seam line. I also use sanding sponges and sanding paper to work on curved surfaces. But I avoid using any rigid tool, like a sanding stick for this, as it will flatten the curve and distort the profile of the kit. And we don't want that. I am now using fine grit sanding sponges to clean up the area. And lastly, I use this polishing stick to restore the shine on the surface. The sanding does result in loss of some surface detail on the kit. So, the next step is to try and restore these features. I use this mini photo etch saw to restore the panel lines. The new panel lines are cleaned up with some Tamiya extra thin cement. Some joints require a filling agent. Usually I use a water-based putty, but this time I decided to use a home-brewed concoction of plastic pieces dissolved in Tamiya extra thin cement. So, as before, the sides of the seam have been protected with some tape, and I add the dissolved plastic into the gap. I let this dry for a few hours and then sand it down with some sponges. I usually start with an 800 grit sponge and then keep moving to finer and finer grit, ending with a 1500 grit sponge. Once I am done with the sanding, I will restore the lost panel lines like before. Time now to start putting the wings together. If you want to add the external bomb to the plane, you will need to drill in a few extra holes. Next, I glue together the wing-mounted cannons and machine guns. The flaps and ailerons comprise two parts that I sand and glue together. The guns, flaps and ailerons are glued in place and the wing halves are glued together. Finally, the wing and fuselage are glued together. Now onto the tail surfaces, which are cut, cleaned and glued. Since ours will be a closed engine plane, I cut and clean all the exhaust and cowling pieces and glue the engine shut. The gun covers are clear plastic. I guess if you want, you could leave them unpainted and then you could see the cannons and guns. But I will be painting them, so I simply glue them in place. I also glue in most of the remaining sub-assemblies, like the air scoop. The propeller assembly is glued together, but I do not glue it onto the kit yet. There are two ways that I usually like to mask the canopy. When I have to mask straight lines, like here, I usually like to use this ultra thin masking tape. Now, I bought this tape, but you can always cut thin strips out of regular masking tape to do this. I just line up the masking tape with the side and then cut away the extra tape. The reason I like doing this is because, firstly, I get super straight lines, and secondly, the use of my hobby knife is minimal, and so are the chances of scratching the canopy. When dealing with rounded shapes, like here, I use masking fluid. In this case, Mr. Masking Sol R. I just put some masking fluid in the middle and then use a cocktail stick to push it to the sides. Once the masking fluid is dry, I glue the canopy in place. The bubble part of the canopy will be painted separately and glued in later. The canopy is given a coat of interior green, the one I used for the cockpit, so that the inside of the canopy matches the inside of the cockpit. Now I clean up the entire kit with alcohol before I start with the painting. Right, fellow model makers, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do like and subscribe. Next time, we will paint the kit. Till then, good luck and happy modeling!